silence of the Dust Creek Gully was shattered not by sound, but by stillness. Amos Kane reined in his old mare, Dusty, her ears pricked forward, the unnatural shape wedged beneath a skeletal juniper. A weathered mail crate, stenciled with faded lettering, lay half buried in the ochre silt, untouched by the morning sun that baked the rocks. Then it came, a thin, reedy cry, fragile as spun glass. Amos dismounted, heart thudding against his ribs. Inside the crate, swaddled in rough wool, lay two impossibly small infants. A scrap of paper, pinned by a rusted nail, bore a single, chilling line: "Don't let their father find them." Who abandons newborns to the desert's mercy? And what kind of monster hunts his own blood? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. A cry, weak and insistent, pierced the vast, indifferent quiet of the Wyoming Badlands. Amos Kane stood frozen, the note's jagged script burning into his vision even as he looked away, scanning the rimrock above the gully. Nothing moved but dust devils, swirling like miniature ghosts across the sun-bleached earth. The silence pressing again, heavier now, freighted with the tiny, desperate sounds emanating from the crate. He knelt, the grit grinding under his worn leather knee patches, a sound unnaturally loud. Up close, the crate stank of old wood, damp earth, and something else, the sharp, milky scent of infants. The wool blankets were coarse. Cheap burlap dyed a muddy brown, already fraying at the edges. Nestled within, impossibly small and fragile, were two babies. One had a shock of dark hair plastered to its damp scalp, the other only wisps of pale gold. Their faces were pinched, lips slightly blue, tiny chests fluttering like captive birds. A boy and a girl, Amos guessed numbly, their vulnerability is stark. Terrifying accusation against the brutal landscape. His own breath hitched, catching on a memory sharp as flint. Sarah's face, flushed with joy, holding their own tiny bundle wrapped in soft flannel, sunlight catching the downy hair. He slammed the door shut on that image, the old ache flaring white-hot before he buried it deep. This wasn't his grief. This was trouble. Deep, dangerous trouble delivered in a box. "Easy now," he murmured, the words rasping in his parched throat, unfamiliar on his tongue. He wasn't a man used to speaking, least of all to infants. His calloused hands, more accustomed to roping steers or hefting hay bales, felt clumsy, enormous. He gently touched the cheek of the dark-haired babe. It was cool, too cool. Exposure. The Wyoming spring mornings held a deceptive bite, the sun's warmth slow to penetrate the shadowed depths of the gully. They couldn't stay here. The note fluttered slightly in a sudden gust. Don't let their father find them. The threat hung in the air, colder than the gully shade. Who was he? A vengeful outlaw? A powerful rancher with a grudge? Some debtor fleeing justice or inflicting it? The possibilities were as vast and menacing as the land itself. Amos tucked the note into the pocket of his faded denim shirt, the paper feeling like a live coal against his chest. Decision made, fueled by a primal urge he couldn't name but couldn't deny, Amos acted. He unbuckled the thick leather straps of his saddlebags, emptying the meager contents. Jerky, a twist of tobacco, a whetstone, onto the ground. He lined the bottom with his spare flannel shirt, soft from countless washes. With infinite care, moving as if handling spun glass, he lifted each infant, marveling at their terrifying lightness, and placed them side by side in the makeshift nest within the saddlebags. The dark-haired one whimpered. The fair one merely blinked unfocused eyes, too weak for more. He secured the saddlebags carefully, ensuring they were snug but not constricted, then draped his heavy, sheepskin-lined coat over the top, shielding them from the wind and prying eyes. Hefting the awkward bundle felt like carrying the weight of the world. Dusty shifted, sensing the change, her intelligent eyes watching him. Amos secured the bundle across the saddle horn with practiced knots, his fingers moving automatically while his mind raced. The crate, evidence. He couldn't leave it. With a grunt, he dragged it deeper into the juniper's meager shade, scattering loose rocks and sagebrush over it. Not perfect, but it might buy time. Time for what? He didn't know. The ride back to his homestead, the Box K, was a blur of tension and hyper-awareness. Every creak of saddle leather, every skitter of a lizard, every distant cry of a hawk seemed amplified. He held the saddlebags close, one arm encircling them protectively, his body a shield against the emptiness. Dusty plodded steadily, her steady gait a counterpoint to the frantic pounding in his chest. He scanned the horizons relentlessly, the jagged teeth of the iron hollow bluffs to the west, the rolling, sagebrush-choked hills to the east, the long, dusty ribbon of the trail snaking south toward the barely existent town of Bitter Springs. Nothing, just the endless sky, a hard, indifferent blue. Yet, the note's warning echoed. Find them. Someone knew these babies were out here. Someone wanted them back, or wanted them gone. The deliberate abandonment in the gully, the specific warning, it spoke of calculation and fear. A fear Amos was beginning to share. The Box K emerged from the landscape like a scar. A low-slung cabin of weathered pine, a leaning barn, a corral fashioned from gnarled juniper posts. It wasn't much, just a hard-won hold against the wilderness, a testament to solitude. Amos dismounted stiffly, the weight of the saddlebags and the burden within making his movements leaden. He carried the infants inside, kicking the heavy plank door shut behind him. The cabin's interior was spare and neat. A stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a single chair, a narrow cot pile with blankets, shelves holding essential supplies. The air smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and a lingering scent of leather and loneliness. He laid the saddlebags gently on the table. The immediate problem, warmth and sustenance. He stirred the embers in the hearth, adding kindling and split logs until a healthy fire crackled, casting flickering, dancing shadows on the walls. He heated water in a small, blackened kettle, testing the temperature on his wrists like he vaguely recalled Sarah doing. Finding an old, clean cloth, he dipped a corner in the warm water and carefully wiped the grime and dried tears from the tiny faces. They stirred, the warmth seeming to seep into their fragile bodies. The dark-haired boy screwed up his face and let out a thin, protesting wail. The girl merely opened her mouth in a silent, rooting motion. Milk. They needed milk. Amos had none. He cursed softly under his breath. Goat? Old Bessie, his ancient milk cow, was dry. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at him. Think. He remembered the Jensen place, 5 miles east. Elara Jensen kept goats. She was a widow, sharp-tongued and wary, but not unkind beneath it. Could he risk it? Could he leave them? Could he bring them? Both options felt fraught with peril. The note burned in his pocket. He found a small tin cup. He'd make do. He watered down some canned condensed milk he used in his coffee, warming it slightly. Dipping the corner of the clean cloth into the weak solution, he offered it to the crying boy. The infant latched onto it instinctively, sucking weakly. Relief, profound and unexpected, washed over Amos. He repeated the process with the girl, who accepted the moisture with a faint sigh. It was painstaking, messy work. The silence of the cabin broken only by the crackle of the fire, the soft suckling sounds, and Amos's own ragged breathing. As he tended them, the enormity of a situation settled upon him like a physical weight. 2 helpless lives, thrust upon him by unseen hands, carrying a death sentence from an unseen father. His solitary existence, a carefully constructed fortress against the world's cruelties and his own past pain, lay shattered. He looked down at the tiny forms, now resting slightly easier, their cheeks gaining a faint flush. The boy's dark lashes fanned against his skin. The girl's pale hair caught the firelight. An unfamiliar tightness constricted his throat. He'd lost everything once. The thought of these 2, abandoned and hunted, something deep within him, long dormant, stirred. A fierce, protective instinct flared, surprising in its intensity. No, he wouldn't let harm come to them. Not while he drew breath. But how? He was one man on an isolated spread. He needed supplies, information. He needed to understand the threat. He needed to hide them. The cabin felt suddenly exposed, its windows like staring eyes. He barred the door, a heavy timber slotted into iron brackets, a precaution he rarely took. He forced himself to eat some cold beans, his gaze constantly flicking to the makeshift cradle he'd fashioned from a sturdy wooden box lined with blankets near the hearth. The infant slept fitfully. He checked his Winchester rifle, leaning by the door. The familiar weight of the walnut stock and cold steel was a small comfort. He oiled the action methodically, the rhythmic motion calming his nerves. His bone-handled hunting knife lay sharp on the table. He slid it into the sheath on his belt. Dusk bled across the sky, painting the high clouds in shades of bruised purple and dying orange. The vast emptiness outside deepened. The shadows pooling like ink in the hollows. Amos paced the small confines of the cabin, a caged animal. The silence pressing again, but now it was a different kind of silence, watchful, waiting. Every creak of the settling timbers made him start. Was that the wind sighing around the eaves? Or something else? He extinguished the lamp, leaving only the fire's glow. He sat in the chair by the hearth, the rifle across his knees, watching the sleeping infants, watching the faint rectangle of the barred door. The weight of the note in his pocket was a constant reminder. Don't let their father find them. He strained his ears, listening to the symphony of the night. The wind's low moan, the distant yip of a coyote, the crackle of the fire. Then, cutting to familiar sounds, sharp and unmistakable in the vast stillness, the distant, rhythmic clop, clop, clop of a single horse moving at a steady trot. Not ambling, not grazing, traveling, on the trail that led past the turnoff to the Box K, coming from the direction of the Dust Creek Gully. Amos froze, his breath catching in his throat. His fingers tightened on the Winchester stock, knuckles white. He rose silently, moving to the small, grimy window beside the door. Peering through a gap in the heavy burlap curtain, he scanned the moon-washed landscape. The rider was a dark silhouette against the silvered sagebrush, perhaps 200 yards out, moving steadily along the main trail. Heading north, away from his ranch, away from the gully. Relief warred with suspicion. Just a traveler? At this hour? Or a scout? Someone checking the territory? He watched, heart hammering against his ribs, as the figure grew smaller, swallowed by the distance and the gathering night. Just as Amos began to unclench his grip on the rifle, the rider stopped. Just for a moment, the silhouette turned, a dark shape against the horizon, seemingly looking back, looking toward the Box K. Then, with a nudge, the horse resumed its pace, disappearing over a low rise. The silence rushed back, thicker, heavier than before. Amos remained at the window, the cold dread coiling in his gut. That pause, that look back, it wasn't the movement of a man simply passing through. It was a gesture of someone marking a place, someone taking note. The fire crackled, casting long, leaping shadows that seemed to dance with menace on the cabin walls. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched, vast and watchful. The hunter had begun his search. The rider's silhouette etched against the moon-washed ride for that one deliberate heartbeat, vanished into the deeper shadows beyond. Amos Kane didn't move from the grimy window pane. The cold dread that coiled in his gut during the rider's pause hardened into something heavier, colder, a lodestone of fear pulling at his core. The fire's warmth at his back felt suddenly insufficient against the chill seeping to the cabin walls, born not of the Wyoming night, but that lingering, backward glance. Marked, the Box K was marked. He counted breaths, his own ragged, the infants soft and shallow in their box cradle near the hearth. The vast silence outside, previously a familiar, if lonely, cloak, now felt like a held breath, a waiting audience. Every creak of timber, every rustle of wind in the dry sage beyond the door became a potential footfall, a stealthy approach. He remained statue still, eyes straining against the darkness beyond the window, rifle stock cool and solid beneath his white-knuckled grip. Minutes stretched, thin and brittle as old parchment. No sound returned but the wind's low, mournful sigh and the crackling protest of the burning logs. Finally, muscles protesting, Amos eased back. He banked the fire, leaving only glowing embers that pulsed like watchful eyes in the near darkness. He wouldn't sleep. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with unseen hunters and too fragile lives depending on his vigilance. He dragged his chair close to the hearth, positioning to command a view of both the door and the window. The Winchester laid across his knees. The bone handle of his hunting knife pressed reassuringly against his hip. He watched the twins. The boy, dark-haired and restless even in sleep, twitched. The girl, pale as moonlight, lay unnervingly still, her breathing a fragile thread. The sight pierced the armor of Amos's solitude, striking a nerve raw and deep. It wasn't just a vulnerability. It was the echo. He saw Sarah's face again, not flushed with joy this time, but pale and drawn against a rough pillow in their old sod house further south. He saw the small bundle they'd wrapped with such trembling hope, silent, unmoving. The midwife's quiet words, the crushing emptiness that followed. He'd buried it all deep beneath years of hard work and self-imposed isolation, building the box case stone by stone, fence post by fence post, as a bulwark against memory. Now, these foundlings, delivered in a crate like unwanted freight, had breached his defenses. The old grief surged, a bitter tide, mingling with a fierce, protective fire that startled him with its intensity. Not again, not while I live. Dawn came reluctantly, staining the eastern sky with bruised purple and hesitant streaks of rose. Amos, stiff and bleary-eyed but wired with tension, moved with silent purpose. He checked the infants. The girl still seemed too weak, barely stirring when he touched her cool cheek. The boy sucked feebly on a cloth dipped in the watered-down condensed milk. The meager supply wouldn't last. Ilara Jensen and her goats weren't just a convenience now. They were a necessity, but venturing out felt like stepping onto a trapdoor. First, he needed to know. He secured the cabin door from the outside with a heavy timber, a redundant measure, but one that eased his mind a fraction. Saddlebag slung over his shoulder, rifle in hand, he walked the perimeter of his small homestead. His eyes, accustomed to reading the subtle language of the land, the scuff of a rabbit, the drag of the coyote's tail, scanned the hard-packed earth around the cabin, the corral, the lean-to barn. Near the well, a few yards from the cabin door, he stopped dead. The earth was disturbed, not by animal hooves or claws, but by boots. Several pairs, coming from the direction of the main trail, circling the wellhead, then retreating the same way. And the well cover, a heavy wooden lid Amos always secured with a leather thong, lay slightly askew. Ice water seemed to flood Amos's veins. He approached slowly, rifle raised. He nudged the lid fully off with his boot. The smell hit him first, a sharp, acrid stench of corruption. Peering down into the gloom, he saw it. Floating on the dark water's surface, bloated and obscene, was a carcass of a dead badger, deliberately placed. A message as clear as the note in his pocket. "We found you. We can touch what you need." Rage, cold and clean, washed over Amos, momentarily eclipsing the fear. This was malice, a calculated act meant to terrify, to isolate. It screamed a pursuer who knew the value of water in this arid land, who understood the vulnerability of a man alone with infants. He dragged the lid back into place, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The water was fouled. He had a small rain barrel by the cabin corner, half full from a recent squall, but it wouldn't last long. Another problem, another chain tightening. He couldn't delay Ilara. The risk had to be taken. He saddled Dusty, the old mare sensing his tension, her ears flicking nervously. He fashioned a sling from a thick wool blanket, securing the girl infant against his chest beneath his heavy coat, her tiny form a fragile warmth against him. The boy, seemingly stronger, he placed carefully in the padded saddlebags, now affixed securely to the saddle horn. Leaving the ranch felt like walking into gun sights. But staying without milk with fouled water was a slower death sentence. He rode out, not toward the main trail the rider had taken, but cutting cross-country, using the folds and gullies for cover, his eyes constantly scanning the horizons. The Jensen place huddled in shallow valley 5 miles east, a slightly larger cabin with a sturdy barn and a fenced paddock where a few shaggy goats browsed on sparse grass. Smoke curled from the chimney, a defiant wisp against the vastness. Amos approached openly but cautiously, halting Dusty a good 50 yards from the cabin door. He didn't dismount. Ilera Jensen emerged before he could call out. She stood on her porch, a figure as weathered and resilient as the land itself. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, her face a map of sun lines and sternness. She held a long-barreled shotgun, not pointed at him, but resting meaningfully in the crook of her arm. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. The unusual bulk beneath his coat, the saddlebags clearly holding something small and precious, the tension etched deep in his face. "Amos Kane," she called, her voice raspy but clear. "Rode a long way off your patch. What's got you straying so early and burdened?" Her gaze fixed on the slight movement beneath his coat. "Need goat's milk, Ilera," Amos stated, keeping his voice level. "Fresh, as much as you can spare." Her eyebrows shot up. "Goat's milk? You taking up fancy city ways out on the box, K? Or—" her eyes narrowed, sharp as flint shards. "What you got hiding under that coat, Amos? Don't look like no coyote pup." There was no point in subterfuge, not with Ilera. Suspicion was her currency, and she'd sniff out a lie faster than one of her goats found a thistle. Amos slowly, deliberately, opened the top of his coat, revealing the tiny, pale face of the infant girl nestled against his shirt. He saw the shock register on Ilera's face, quickly followed by a deep, unsettling wariness. "Found 'em," Amos said simply. "Two of 'em. Abandoned out near Dust Creek Gully. Boy and a girl. This one, she ain't strong." Ilera didn't lower the shotgun. Her gaze flickered from the infant to the saddlebags, then back to Amos's face, searching. "Found them," she repeated flatly. "Just like that. In a crate, I reckon? Mail crate, maybe?" The question was pointed, laden with implication. Amos felt a fresh jolt of alarm. How could she know? "How'd you figure?" he asked, his voice tight. "Rider came through late yesterday," Ilera said, her eyes never leaving his. "Stopped for water. Fancy rig, polished leather, horse too fine for these parts. Asked about the spread west of here, the one tucked up near the bluffs. Mentioned something about a lost mail shipment. Seemed mighty keen on knowing if anyone lived out that way alone." She paused, letting the weight of it sink in, said his boss was powerful anxious to find it. Powerful anxious indeed. Name was Vance, I think he said. Worked for a Mr. Silas Rourke. She spat the name like a bad taste. "Rourke owns half the territory south of the Powder River. Got a reputation for getting what he wants and burying what gets in his way. That the father you're hiding them young uns from, Amos Kane?" The name Silas Rourke landed like a physical blow. Amos had heard the name, whispers on the wind, stories of ruthless land grabs and men disappearing. A man of that stature hunting his own infants? The monstrous implications of Ilera's words, coupled with the writer's description in the fouled well, painted a picture of terrifying, far-reaching danger. The note's warning wasn't just fear. It was prophecy. "Don't know who the father is." Amos lied, his throat dry. "Just found them. Need milk, Ilera, for the babe." Ilera studied him for a long, hard moment. The suspicion didn't leave her eyes, but something else flickered there, a grudging recognition of the desperate truth in his plea, perhaps, or her own deep-seated distrust of names like Rourke. Finally, with a curt nod, she lowered the shotgun slightly. "Wait here." She disappeared into the cabin, returning moments later with a small, stoppered earthenware jug, still warm from the goat. She handed it up to him, her grip firm. "That's all I can spare. Don't bring trouble to my door, Amos Kane." Names like Rourke, they cast long shadows. Shadows that swallow small folk whole. Her gaze held his, fierce and unflinching. You got a storm brewing, round you, best batten down tight. Amos took the jug, the weight of her words, immense. Obliged, Alara. He tucked it carefully into a saddlebag near the boy. He turned dusty, the urgency to get back to the relative, fragile safety of his cabin a physical pull. Kane! Alara called after him as he nudged Dusty into motion. He glanced back. She stood framed in her doorway, the shotgun visible again. That Vance feller, he had eyes like a snake. Cold, watch your back trail. And your front. The ride back was a gauntlet of imagined threats. Every rock formation became an ambush point, every flutter of wings a signal. He rode faster, less cautiously, driven by the image of the weak infant girl and the chilling named Silas Rourke. He approached the box cave from a different angle, circling wide to scan the homestead before emerging from the cover of a low ridge. Everything looked undisturbed. Smoke still whisked from the chimney. The door timber was still in place. He dismounted quickly, unbarred the door, and hurried inside, the warmth of the cabin a stark contrast to the cold fear gripping him. He tended to the infants first. The warm goat's milk was a lifeline. The girl took it weakly, but she took it. The boys suckled with more vigor. Seeing them fed, a small, hard-won victory, eased a fraction of the tension. But Alara's words echoed, Vance eyes like a snake. Silas Rourke, shadows that swallow small folk whole. He spent the day in a state of heightened vigilance. He hauled water from the rain barrel, boiled it rigorously. He checked the foul well again, despairing at the loss. He walked the perimeter repeatedly, finding no new tracks, but the sense of being watched, of invisible threads tightening, never left him. He reinforced the cabin doors bar with a second timber. He moved the twins' cradle away from the direct line of the window. He cleaned his rifle again, the oil sharp and pungent in the close air. As dusk painted the sky in deepening shades of indigo and charcoal, the silence felt oppressive. He fed the infants again, the simple act of caring for them anchoring him against the rising tide of dread. He sat by the low fire, the Winchester across his lap, listening. The wind had died, leaving an unnatural stillness. Even the coyotes were silent. The twins slept. Then it came. Not a sound from outside, but a soft, distinct scritch-scratch in the direction of the barn wall, just outside the cabin, like a fingernail or perhaps a knife point, dragging slowly across the weathered wood. Amos froze, every sense screaming. He rose silently, a shadow himself, and crept to the window beside the door. He eased back the burlap curtain a fraction an inch, peering into the gathering darkness. At first, he saw nothing but the deep blue gloom, then movement, a figure, hooded and dark, detaching itself from the deeper shadows near the barn. It didn't approach the cabin. It simply stood for a moment, facing the door, a solid, menacing silhouette against the fading light. Then, with deliberate slowness, it raised one arm and pointed, a single, accusing finger aimed directly at Amos Kane's cabin door. The figure held the pose for 3 heartbeats, a chilling tableau. Then, it melted back into the shadows beside the barn, vanishing as completely as if it had never been there. Amos stood rooted, the blood pounding in his ears like a war drum. The silence rushed back, heavier than before, charged with unspoken threat. The pointed finger seemed burned onto his retinas, not just marked anymore. Challenged. The hunter wasn't just searching. He was announcing his presence. He was here. The pointed finger, stark and accusatory in the fading twilight, burned itself onto Amos Kane's vision long after the hooded figure dissolved into the barn's shadowed embrace. He remained frozen at the window, the Winchester's walnut stock slick beneath his sweating palm. The silence that rushed back wasn't empty. It was charged, thick with the echo of that silent challenge. Not searching. Here, the hunter had crossed the threshold from distant menace to immediate threat. The box K wasn't just watched, it was encircled. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, finally unlocked his muscles. He dropped the burlap curtain and spun from the window, his boots silent on the packed earth floor. His first instinct was to barricade the door further, pile furniture, build a fortress. But the cabin was wood and vulnerability. The barn offered stone foundations, deeper shadows, perhaps an escape route he hadn't needed in years. He moved to the twins' box cradle near the low bank fire. The girl slept fitfully, her breathing shallow. The boy was quiet, watchful eyes blinking in the gloom. Amos scooped them both up, their fragile warmth a startling counterpoint to the ice in his veins. He wrapped them tightly in the thickest wool blanket, creating a single swaddled bundle. Cradling them against his chest with one arm, the Winchester held ready in the other, he moved to the cabin's rear door, a smaller, less obvious exit, leading towards a lean-to woodshed and the barn beyond. He paused, listening. Only the sigh of the wind and the frantic thudding of his own heart. He eased the door open, the hinges protesting with a faint groan that sounded like a cannon shot in the tense silence. He slipped out, pressing himself against the rough-hewn logs of the cabin, scanning the moon-washed yard. The barn loomed 20 paces away, its wide door slightly ajar. Had he left it like that? He couldn't remember. Every shadow seemed to arrive with hidden intent. He crossed the open ground in 3 long, silent strides, pushing to the barn door and sliding it mostly shut behind him. The familiar smells of dust, old hay, and leather enveloped him. He moved deep into the shadows, behind the bulk of his old buckboard wagon, its canvas cover long gone. He settled the twins in a nest of relatively clean straw he'd piled for the absent Bessie, tucking the blanket tightly around them. The boy whimpered softly. Amos touched a calloused finger to the tiny cheek. "Hush now," he murmured, the words barely a breath. "Just shadows. Nothing but shadows." The lie tasted bitter. He scanned the barn's interior, the empty stalls, the tools hanging on pegs, the ladder leading to the hayloft. A potential refuge, a potential trap. He couldn't stay hidden. He needed to know. Leaving the twins concealed, he crept back towards a slightly open barn door, pressing himself against the rough timber frame. He peered out. The cabin stood silent, the yard empty under the cold gaze of the rising moon. No movement near the well, nothing by the corral. Had the figure truly vanished, or was it waiting, a spider in its web? A memory, unbidden and sharp as shrapnel, pierced his focus. Not Sarah this time, but earlier, a sun-drenched afternoon on their first homestead, south near the Platte. He'd been mending a fence, Sarah humming inside. A sudden commotion, crows scattering, a panic bleating. He'd run, heart pounding, to find a lone coyote brazen in daylight, circling their small goat pen. He'd fired a warning shot, sending it fleeing. Sarah had emerged, pale but resolute, clutching a butcher knife. "It'll be back," she'd said, her voice tight. "Once they know where the flock is." She'd been right. They'd found the goat dead 2 days later, throat torn. Predators didn't give up. They tested, they waited, they struck when the defense wavered. Silas Rourke was no coyote. He was a wolf with higher teeth like Vance. And they knew where the flock was. Amos needed to see where the figure had gone. He needed tracks. He slipped out of the barn, keeping low, using the corral fence as cover as he circled toward the spot near the barn wall where the hooded shape had stood. The ground was hard-packed, difficult for tracks, but near the corner post, sheltered from the worst of the wind, he saw it, a scuff mark. Then another, boot prints, larger than his own, leading away from the barn, not toward the main trail, but angling northwest, towards the broken country of the Iron Hollow Bluffs. And beside one print, pressed deep into a patch of softer dirt where a little moisture lingered, was a distinct impression. The heel of the boot marked with a unique pattern, a 4-pointed star within a circle, branded leather. Fancy, not the wear of a common drifter. Vance? The tracks led towards a dry gully that snaked its way up into bluffs, a natural pathway but treacherous in the dark. Amos hesitated. Following them alone at night into broken ground was inviting an ambush. Leaving the twins alone in the barn felt equally perilous. His eyes scanned the gully mouth, a dark maw in the moonlit landscape. Something caught his eye, a flicker of unnatural darkness low down near a cluster of boulders guarding the entrance. Not a shadow. Too solid, too deliberate. Leaving to cover the corral, Amos moved with agonizing slowness, rifle ready, every sense screaming. He approached the boulders from the side, keeping low. The smell hit him first, stale tobacco and horse sweat. Then he saw it. A man, slumped against the largest boulder, head lolled forward onto his chest. Not hiding, unconscious, or dead. He wore dark, sturdy clothes, but no hood. Amos recognized the cut of the jacket, the polished leather of the gun belt even in the gloom. The same description Alara had given of Vance's rig. Amos closed the distance, his boots silent on the gravel. 10 feet away, he stopped. The man didn't stir. Amos could see the pale oval of his face now. Slack. Not Vance. Younger, with a scraggly attempt at a beard, but the same type. One of Rourke's men. Amos's gaze swept downward. The man's right hand lay palm up on the ground. Empty, but near his left hip, half concealed beneath his body, was a short-barrel revolver, and protruding from his side, just below the ribs, was the dark, wicked shaft of an arrow, fletched with gray feathers Amos didn't recognize. Amos's breath hitched. Not his doing, not Vance's. Someone else was out here. Someone who had put an arrow into one of Rourke's riders. An ally, or another predator drawn to the blood scent. The complication deepened, turning murkier, more dangerous. He scanned the surrounding rocks, the lip of the gully. Nothing moved. The silence was absolute, watchful. He knelt cautiously, ignoring the fallen man for the moment, and examined the ground near the boulders. More boot prints, overlapping, confused. The distinctive star circle heel mark was there again, alongside others. And then, partially obscured by scuff marks, a different print entirely. Smaller, narrower, made by a softer-soled boot or moccasin. The archer? He found a spot where the soft dirt showed a clear impression. A simple, straight-line pattern, like woven reeds or grass, pressed into the earth. No heel, just the sole. He stood, the implications crashing over him. Rourke's men were here, actively scouting, likely more than just this one. But someone else was hunting them. Who? And why? Was it connected to the twins? To the note? The abandoned crate fell like the first pebble in an avalanche, revealing layers of hidden conflict. He couldn't linger. The fallen rider was bait in a trap he couldn't see. He needed to get back to the twins. He turned, intending to retrace his steps, when a glint of metal caught the moonlight near the unconscious man's boot. Not the revolver. Something smaller, half buried in the gravel. Amos bent and picked it up. A brass button, tarnished with finely made, embossed with an intricate design. A bird in flight, wings outstretched, clutching a tiny, stylized flower in its talons. Unfamiliar, unique. He pocketed it, a tangible clue in a landscape of shadows. He moved quickly back toward the barn, his senses stretched wire-tight. He slipped inside, the familiar smells of small comfort. The twins were as he left them, the girl still breathing her fragile breaths. He gathered them up, the bundled weight grounding him. He couldn't stay in the barn. It felt exposed. The cabin, for all its vulnerability, offered thicker walls, a single defensible door. He would make his stand there. He carried them back across the yard, every shadow a potential enemy, every rustle a drawn bowstring. Back inside the cabin, he barred the door with renewed determination, adding the second timber. He placed the twins back in their cradle near the hearth, stirring the embers to coax a little more light and warmth. He checked his rifle, loaded and ready. The bone-handled knife felt solid on his belt. He paced, the image of the arrow, the strange button, the branded boot print, swirling in his mind alongside the hooded figures pointing finger and Alara's grim warning. Shadows that swallow small folk whole. He needed water. The rain barrel was dangerously low. The fouled well was a constant reminder of Rourke's reach. He couldn't go to the well. Not now. He'd have to ration, melt snow if any fell. The thought of the twins going thirsty tightened his chest like a vice. He looked down at them. The boy's eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling beams with infant solemnity. The girl stirred, her tiny hand curling into a fist. A fierce, almost painful wave of protectiveness surged through Amos, washing away the fatigue and the fear for a moment. They were his now, his charge, his reason. "All right then," he murmured, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. He hadn't intended to name them. Names made them real, made the potential loss unbearable. But staring at their vulnerable faces, the boy's dark intensity mirroring his own, the girl's ethereal fragility, reminding him of Sarah's pale beauty, the words formed unbidden. "Call you? Eli," he said softly to the boy. A strong name, a name that meant ascended. A hope. He touched the girl's pale cheek. "And you? Lumen. Light. A fragile light in the encroaching darkness." He felt foolish, sentimental, yet the name settled something restless inside him. They were no longer foundlings. They were Eli and Lumen, his to shield. He sat by the fire, the Winchester across his lap, listening to the deep silence of the Wyoming night. The wind had picked up again, moaning around the eaves like a restless spirit. He watched Eli and Lumen sleep, their small forms rising and falling. He thought of the arrow, the unknown ally or enemy. He thought of the button, the bird and the flower. A woman's button? The mother's? Hope flared, fragile and dangerous. Suddenly, Dusty snorted loudly from the corral outside. Not her usual sleepy sound. A sharp, startled noise. Amos was on his feet instantly, rifle raised, back pressed against the wall beside the window. He eased the burlap curtain aside a fraction. At first, nothing, just a moon-silvered yard, the dark hulk of the barn. Then movement on the ridge line to the northwest. The same ridge overlooking the gully where he'd found the down rider. Not one figure. Three, silhouetted against the star-strewn sky, mounted, sitting utterly still, watching, not approaching, just watching, like carrion birds waiting. One of the horses shifted, its outline clear against the horizon. Amos's blood ran cold. It wasn't just any horse. Even at this distance, the shape was unmistakable, tall, powerful, with a distinctive, high-stepping stance of thoroughbred. A horse too fine for these parts. Vance. The three riders sat motionless, a silent council of shadows on the ridge, gazing down upon the box K. Amos held his breath, finger resting lightly on the Winchester's trigger. The message was clear. The testing was over. The waiting was done. The wolf and his pack had gathered. The siege had begun. The three riders sat etched against the ridge line like jagged tombstones silhouetted by the indifferent stars. Amos Kane didn't blink, didn't breathe, his finger a hair's breadth from the Winchester's trigger. The thoroughbred shifted, a ripple of contained power in the moonlight, its rider's posture radiating a cold, predatory patience. Vance. The name echoed in Amos's mind, colder than the Wyoming night, air seeping through the chinks in the cabin logs. The silent watching was worse than the charge. It was the coiled tension before the snake's strike, the suffocating stillness before the avalanche. He eased the burlap curtain back into place, plunging the cabin into near darkness save for the hearth's pulsing embers. The faint light caught the tiny, rhythmic rise and fall of Eli's chest in his cradle box. Lumen lay beside him, still worryingly pale, her breath's shallow threads. The sight of them, so impossibly fragile amidst the encroaching menace, tightened Amos's chest like a rawhide strap. He'd named them. They weren't just foundlings anymore. They were Eli, strong and watchful, and Lumen, a flicker of light in the consuming dark. His light, his burden, his reason to stand. The siege had begun. Amos moved with the grim efficiency of a man building his own last stand. He dragged a heavy oak table across the door, reinforcing the timber barricade. He piled sacks of grain and seed against a lower window, leaving only narrow slits for sighting a rifle. Every scrap of water from the dwindling rain barrel was rationed into a tin pail, covered tightly. He checked the Winchester's load, the brass cartridges cool and deadly in his palm. The bone-handled knife felt reassuringly solid on his belt. He worked silently, the only sound to crackle the fire, the twins' soft breathing and the frantic drumming of his own heart. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp as a shard of glass. Not of Sarah this time, but the stillness before the storm that took her. That terrible, oppressive quiet as the sky turned the color of fresh brews over their old sod house. He'd been mending harness, Sarah humming inside, a fragile bubble of peace. Then the unnatural hush, the way the birds vanished. He'd known, deep in his bones, that something monstrous was coming. He knew it now, staring at the barricaded door. Silas Rourke was at storm, and Vance was his lightning. He knelt by the cradle box. Eli's dark eyes were open, staring up at him with an unnerving calm. Lumen stirred, a tiny whimper escaping her lips. Amos dipped a clean cloth corner into the last precious drops of Alara's goat milk, warmed slightly by the hearthstones. He offered it to Lumen first. She sucked weakly, her eyes fluttering closed. Eli turned his head, refusing, his small brow furrowed, as if sensing the tension. "Easy, Eli," Amos murmured, the unfamiliar tenderness grating in his dry throat. He touched the boy's clenched fist. "Gotta be strong now. For her." He glanced at Lumen. "For both of you." His hand brushed against his denim shirt pocket, feeling the hard outline of the brass button. He drew it out, holding it up to catch the ember's glow. The bird in flight, wings outstretched, the delicate flower clutched in its talons. The craftsmanship was fine, expensive, utterly out of place in this hard land. Where had he seen this? The memory danced just out of reach. A flash of color in Bitter Springs? A woman passing by? Not Sarah. Someone else. The mother? Cora. The captured rider had gasped before the arrow struck. Cora. The button felt suddenly heavy, imbued with the weight of a story untold. Why would a woman with such finery flee into the Wyoming wilderness with newborn twins? What had driven her to abandon them in a crate with only a desperate warning? And what had Rourke done to her? The thought sent a fresh wave of cold rage through Amos. He tucked the button away, a tangible piece of the puzzle, a silent plea from a woman he'd never met. Dawn crept in, gray and hesitant, revealing the riders still motionless on the ridge. They hadn't moved all night, a constant, oppressive presence. Amos alternated between watching them through the narrow slit and tending the twins. His eyes burned with fatigue, his muscles ached, but the fear was a cold fire that kept him alert. The water pail was perilously low. He eyed the fowl well through a crack in the grain sacks, a mocking symbol of Rourke's reach. Mid-morning brought movement, not from the ridge, but closer. A lone figure, smaller than the riders, detached itself from the scrub near the poisoned well. Not Vance. This man moved a furtive, skulking gait, keeping low. He carried a canvas sack. Amos tracked him through the rifle sight, his finger tightening. The man stopped near the well, glanced furtively toward the cabin, then up at the ridge. He wasn't scouting. He was delivering something. The man upended the sack. A cascade of small, dark objects spilled out near the wellhead. Rats. Dead rats. A fresh wave of revulsion washed over Amos. Another message. Another act of petty, psychological warfare. We can still touch what's yours. We can make it rot. The man scurried back into the scrub, vanishing like the vermin he'd delivered. The sight ignited a cold fury in Amos. Waiting was death by inches. He needed water. He needed to know if the archer, the one who'd felled Rourke's man, was friend or foe. He needed to act. He devised a plan born of desperation. He fashioned a decoy, a bundle blanket roughly the size of a swaddled infant, and placed it carefully in the shadowed corner of the cabin farthest from the twins' cradle. He then moved Eli and Lumen, still wrapped together, into the cold hearth itself, carefully covering them with ashes and soot-blackened wood, leaving only a tiny air space. They'd be hidden, protected by stone if the worst came. The sight of them nestled in the ashes, looking like discarded kindling, sent a pang through him, but it was the safest place. He took a deep breath, checked the Winchester, and slipped out the cabin's rear door, moving like a ghost along the back wall. He used the lean-to woodshed for cover, then darted towards the gully where he'd found the down rider. He needed to see if the archer had left any sign, any clue about their allegiance. He found tracks near the boulders, the distinctive straight-lined, woven pattern of the soft sole. They led not up into bluffs, but along the gully bottom, toward a dense thicket of chokecherry and willow near a seasonal spring. Hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered. He followed, senses screaming, rifle ready. He found a camp hidden in the thicket, small, neat, almost invisible. A bedroll of faded calico, a small coal-fire pit, a woven grass satchel hanging from a branch, and tucked beneath a flat rock, a piece of paper, folded small. Amos snatched it up, his heart hammering. Not a note, a drawing, sketched in charcoal on rough paper. It depicted a bird in flight, wings outstretched, clutching a tiny flower, an exact match for the button. Beneath the drawing, in a delicate, feminine hand, were written 2 words, Iron Hollow. The revelation hit Amos like a physical blow. Iron Hollow, the old mining ghost town deep in the bluffs, a day's hard ride northwest. Was it a refuge? A trap? A message meant for someone else? Was the archer Cora? Had she survived and led him here? Or was it Rourke's doing? The ambiguity was maddening. A twig snapped behind him. Amos spun, Winchester coming up. Van stood 10 paces away, framed by the chokecherry branches. He wasn't mounted. His polished boots were dusty, his face a mask of cold amusement. He held a revolver loosely at his side. Looking for something, Kane? Vance's voice was smooth as oiled leather, colder than the creek stones. Or someone. His snake-like eyes flicked to the drawing in Amos's hand. A flicker of recognition, then something darker, satisfaction. Found her little love note, did you? Took you long enough. He took a step closer. Cora always did have a sentimental streak. Fancy drawings. Fancy buttons. He gestured vaguely with the revolver. Pity sentiment don't stop bullets. Amos kept the rifle leveled. What did Rourke do to her? Vance chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. What needed doing? She crossed Silas Rourke, stole what was his. Them brats. He spat the word. He don't take kindly to thieves, especially family. His eyes hardened. He wants what's his, Kane. The brats, and the proof she stole. Proof? Amos's mind raced. What proof? Land deeds? Money? Something more? The necklace, Van said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though they were utterly alone. Gold chain, with a locket, got her picture inside. Rourke's picture, too, from better days. Proof there was his lawful heirs before she tried to ruin him. A cruel smile twisted his lips. Rourke's new bride. Well-connected, see. She ain't keen on precedent, offspring muddying the inheritance. Especially twins folk might call unnatural. He shrugged. Bad for business. Bad for appearances. So, the brats disappear. The proof disappears. Everybody wins. Except Cora and you. The monstrous truth crashed over Amos. It wasn't superstition. It was greed and cold, calculated social climbing. Rourke wanted his heirs a race to secure a wealthy new marriage. The twins were just obstacles. Cora had fled to save them, taking the locket as proof of their birthright and their father's deadly intent. He sent you to clean his mess, Amos stated, his voice flat, dead. I'm the broom, Vance confirmed, raising the revolver slightly. Now, You got two choices, Kane. Hand over the brats in that drawing. Maybe Cora left the necklace where it points, and you walk away. Or, he gestured back towards the box K with his free hand. My boys start burning, your little fortress down around your ears. Starting with that tinder-dry barn. Hear them brats roast. Your choice. Amos didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee, not in surrender, but for a steadier shot. The Winchester roared, the sound shattering the gully's stillness. Vance flinched, but Amos hadn't aimed at him. The bullet struck the chokecherry branch above Vance's head, showering him with twigs and leaves. Vance stumbled back, cursing, momentarily blinded. Amos was already moving, crashing through the thicket away from Vance, away from the box K, towards a deeper wilderness. He had to draw them off. He had to get to Iron Hollow. It was the twins' only chance. He heard Vance's furious shout behind him, then a gunshot that whined past his ear, splintering a sapling. He ran harder, lungs burning, the drawing clutched in his hand, the image of Eli and Lumen hidden in the cold ashes seared into his mind. He burst out of the thicket onto open ground, angling for a steep, rocky draw that led up into the higher bluffs. He risked a glance back. Vance had emerged from the thicket, bellowing orders on the distant ridge. The two other riders spurred their horses, beginning a descent toward the box K. Smoke, thick, dark, and terrifyingly familiar, began to curl into the sky above the ranch buildings. They hadn't waited. They were burning it. The barn first, just as Vance promised. Panic, raw and primal, seized Amos. Eli and Lumen were hidden in the hearth, but the cabin would be next. The smoke, the heat, he'd led Vance away, but he'd left them defenseless. He'd gambled their lives and lost. He turned, screaming a denial into the wind, ready to charge back down the slope toward the inferno, towards his death and theirs. But as he turned, a figure stepped out from behind a boulder directly in his path, blocking the trail back down. It wasn't Vance. It was the archer, a woman, younger than he expected, her face smudged with dirt and exhaustion, framed by ragged auburn hair escaping a ruffled cap. Her clothes were worn trail gear, practical and muted. She held a sturdy hunting bow, an arrow loosely nocked. Her eyes, wide and a startling shade of green, held no hostility, only desperate urgency. They flickered past him toward the rising smoke at the box K, then locked onto his face. "The twins?" she demanded, her voice hoarse but clear, cutting through the wind and the distant crackle of flames. "Are they still in the cabin?" Her gaze dropped to the charcoal drawing clutched in Amos's hand, then back to his eyes, pleading, terrified. "Tell me he didn't get them. Tell me they're alive." The woman's plea, "Tell me he didn't get them. Tell me they're alive," hung in the ash-choked air, sharper than the distant crackle of flames consuming the box K barn. Her green eyes, wide with terror that mirrored Amos's own, locked onto his, stripping away any doubt. This was Cora, the twins' mother, the woman who braved the wilderness, abandoned her children to save them, and fought Rourke's hunters with nothing but a bow. "Hearth!" Amos rasped, the word tearing from his smoke-raw throat. He gestured frantically back towards the ranch, where thick, black smoke now billowed skyward, obscuring the ridge. Hidden, in the hearth, but the fire. He didn't need to finish. Cora's face paled beneath the grime, her eyes darting towards the inferno. Understanding dawned, horrific and immediate. The cabin would be next. The heat, the smoke. Her children were roasting stones away from the blaze meant to flush them out. A gunshot echoed from below, snapping their attention back. Vance, recovered from Amos's diversion shot, was scrambling up the rocky draw, his revolver spitting lead that whined off the boulders near them. Behind him, through the drifting smoke, Amos glimpsed the other two riders dismounting near the burning barn, likely preparing to storm the cabin itself. "Go!" Cora hissed, her voice cracking with desperation. She already had another arrow knocked, the bowstring drawn taut against her cheek. "Save them. I'll hold this snake." Her gaze flickered towards Amos, a fierce, unspoken command. Trust me. There was no time for debate, no time for the 1,000 questions burning in Amos's mind. The twins were seconds away from suffocation, or worse. He met Cora's gaze for a heartbeat, seeing Sarah's fierce protectiveness mirrored there, amplified by a primal maternal fire. He nodded, a single, curt dip of his chin. "Iron Hollow," he gasped, clutching the charcoal drawing. "We meet at Iron Hollow." He didn't wait for confirmation. Turning, he plunged back down the slope toward the burning ranch, not toward the trail, but angling for the cover of the gully he traversed earlier, using the smoke and confusion as a shield. Behind him, he heard the sharp twang of Cora's bowstring and Vance's enraged shout. The acrid stench of burning wood and hay intensified as Amos neared the ranch yard. Heat radiated from the blazing barn, painting the scene in hellish oranges and blacks. The two riders were near the cabin door, one kicking at the barricaded planks, the other holding a burning brand aloft, ready to toss it onto the dry shingled roof. Amos's heart stopped. Lumen, Eli, he didn't think. He raised a Winchester, bracing against a fence post slick with soot. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the report echoing strangely flat against the roar of the fire. The rider holding the brand jerked violently, the burning timber tumbling from his grasp to sputter harmlessly in the dirt. His companion spun, drawing his revolver, eyes wide with surprise, scanning the smoke for the shooter. Amos was already moving, sprinting low across the open yard, using the billowing smoke as cover. He reached the cabin's rear door just as the remaining rider spotted him and fired. Splinters flew from the door frame near Amos's head. He wrenched the door open, slammed it shut behind him, and dropped the heavy timber bar back into place. The cabin interior was already hazy with smoke drifting through the chinks, the air thick and hot. The crackling roar of the barn fire was a constant, menacing backdrop. He stumbled to the hearth, coughing. The fire within was banked low, but the stones radiated intense heat. Frantically, he scraped away the covering layer of ashes and charred wood. Eli and Lumen lay swaddled together, their faces smudged black, but miraculously, their tiny chests rose and fell. Lumen coughed, a weak, pitiful sound. Eli's eyes blinked open, dark and watchful, seemingly unfazed by the inferno outside. Relief, so profound it felt like physical pain, washed over Amos. He scooped them up, blanket and all, cradling their soot-streaked forms against his chest. "Got you," he murmured, his voice thick. "Got you now." He grabbed a near-empty water pail and a cleanish cloth, soaking it and holding it over their faces as he moved towards the rear door again. He couldn't stay. The rider outside would regroup, and the cabin roof could catch any second. He risked a glance out the small rear window. The rider was circling cautiously, revolver drawn, towards the back. Trapped, panic clawed at Amos's throat. He looked down at Eli and Lumen, their lives depending on his next move. He remembered the old root cellar, dug deep beneath the cabin floor years ago, accessed by a heavy trapdoor near the woodpile outside. He rarely used it, but it was stone-lined, cool, and hidden. A heavy thud shook the front door. The rider was trying to break in. Amos acted. He slipped out the rear door, clutching the twins, and darted to the woodpile. He kicked aside a stack of kindling, revealing the iron ring set into the worn wood of the trapdoor. With a grunt born of desperation, he hauled it open, revealing a yawning blackness smelling of damp earth. He lowered the bundled twins carefully into the cool darkness, then dropped down beside them, pulling the heavy trapdoor shut just as a bullet smacked into the woodpile above. Darkness enveloped them, thick and absolute, broken only by the muffled roar of the fire and the frantic pounding of Amos's heart. The air was cool, damp, a stark relief from the choking heat above. Eli whimpered softly. Amos fumbled in the dark, finding the soaked cloth and dabbing their faces, whispering reassurances he didn't feel. They were safe for now, buried alive. Above, the sounds intensified, shouts, more gunshots, the ominous creak of timbers stressed by heat. Then a new sound, the sharp, unmistakable twang of Cora's bow, followed by a guttural cry. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the fire's hungry roar. Then, pounding footsteps retreated. Had Cora driven them off? Or had she... Amos shoved the thought away, focusing on the fragile breasts of the infants in his arms. An eternity seemed to pass in the suffocating dark. The heat radiating through the trapdoor lessened slightly. The roar of the fire diminished to a crackle. Cautiously, Amos pushed the trapdoor open a fraction. Acrid smoke stung his eyes, but the immediate inferno seemed past. The barn was a skeletal ruin, glowing embers. The cabin stood, scorched but intact. No sign of the riders. Or Cora. He lifted the twins out, blinking in the hazy, ash-filled daylight. The yard was a wasteland of destruction. Movement near the gully mouth caught his eye. Cora emerged, limping, her bow clutched in one hand, her other arm hanging awkwardly. She scanned the yard, her gaze wild until it landed on Amos, holding the twins. A sob escaped her, raw and relieved. She stumbled towards them. "Eli, Lumen," she breathed, reaching out trembling hands. Amos gently transferred the bundled infants to her arms. She held them close, burying her face in a blanket, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. The sight, the mother reunited with the children she'd sacrificed everything for, struck Amos with a force that left him breathless. He saw Sarah holding their own lost child, the grief he'd carried like stones suddenly shifting, not vanishing, but making space for something else. "Vance," Amos asked hoarsely, scanning the perimeter. "Winged him," Cora gasped, lifting her head, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. Scared the others off when their partner went down. They ran like the curs they are. She winced, clutching her arm. Dislocated, I think. When I tackled Vance near the gully, she shuddered, unable to finish. He said Rourke himself is coming. Rode out last night after Vance reported finding the crate empty. He's bringing a new wife. Wants her to see the problem dealt with. Permanently. Her voice broke. He wants the locket. Proof I didn't lie about them being his. Amos remembered Vance's words. Proof they was his lawful heirs. He pulled the brass button from his pocket. "This yours?" Found it near one of his men. Cora touched the embossed bird and flower with a trembling finger. "My mother's, from a dress long gone." A bitter smile touched her lips. "The locket, Silas gave it to me when Lumen and Eli were born. His picture, mine a lock of each baby's hair inside. Proof. He took it back when he decided they were inconvenient." Her eyes hardened. "I stole it the night I ran. Hid it in Iron Hollow, where I grew up, before he bought my father out, ruined him." She looked at the charcoal drawing Amos still clutched. "I left signs, hoping someone kind might find the twins, find the drawing, find the truth before he did." The monstrous puzzle snapped fully into place. Greed, ambition, the callous erasure of inconvenient lives. Amos looked down at Eli and Lumen. Nestled against their mother, Lumen still pale but breathing easier, Eli watching him with solemn eyes. They weren't just children, they were truth. Truth Silas Rourke wanted buried. "We can't stay," Amos stated, his voice firm. "Rourke's coming. Iron Hollow." Cora nodded, grim determination replacing the fear. "It's defensible. High ground. Places to hide. And the locket, it's there. If we can get it to someone in Bitter Springs, maybe a judge." Hope flickered in her eyes, fragile but real. They moved quickly. Amos fashioned a sling for Cora's arm. He salvaged what Lily could from the scorched cabin. His saddlebag, some jerky, the last of the water, the Winchester, his knife. He found Dusty trembling but unharmed in corral, shielded from the worst of the fire by distance. He saddled her quickly. Cora mounted behind him, cradling the twins against her good side with Amos's help. The weight of 4 lives pressed down on the old mare, but she plodded forward with stoic endurance as Amos turned her head northwest. towards the looming bluffs and the ghost town of Iron Hollow. They rode through the afternoon, pushing Dusty hard but carefully. Amos scanned the back trail relentlessly. Cora tended the twins with the last of the goat's milk Amos had salvaged, her movement stiff with pain but tender. The landscape grew rougher, the trail climbing into the broken teeth of the Iron Hollow bluffs. Dusk was painting the high clouds in bruised purples and blood red when they reached the outskirts of the ghost town. Iron Hollow was a skeleton clinging to the mountainside. Crumbling stone foundations, a few sagging wooden structures, the gaping black mouth of the main mine shaft. Wind whistled through empty windows, carrying the scent of decay and ancient dust. Cora directed Amos to a relatively intact stone building near the mine entrance. The old assayer's office, she said. Inside it was cold and dark, but the thick walls offered shelter. While Cora settled the twins in a corner, Amos built a small, smokeless fire in the old hearth. The warmth was a small comfort. Cora motioned him towards a loose floorboard near the back wall. Underneath, wrapped in oilskin, was a small, ornately carved box. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a delicate gold chain with a small, oval locket. Cora opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, facing each other, were tiny portraits. A younger, harder-faced Silas Rourke and Cora herself, her eyes bright with a hope long extinguished. Behind each portrait, secure with thread, were wisps of fine, dark hair and pale gold. Eli and Lumen. Proof. Tomorrow, Cora whispered, snapping the locket shut, her voice tight with exhaustion and pain. We get this to Bitter Springs. To Marshall Cobb. He's rough but honest. Hates Rourke. Amos nodded, watching the firelight play on the twins' sleeping faces. Eli sighed in his sleep, a contented sound. Lumen's breathing, though still shallow, was steady. The responsibility hadn't lifted. It had shifted, shared now with Cora. The grief for Sarah and his own child was still a deep river within him, but its current had changed. It flowed alongside a fierce protectiveness for these two lives, and a hard-won respect for the woman who'd fought so desperately for them. The night was bitterly cold, the wind keening to the ruins like a chorus of lost souls. Amos took first watch, sitting near the doorway, the Winchester across his lap, the locket of cold, heavy weight in his pocket. He listened to the wind, the distant cry of a night bird, the soft breathing of the twins, and Cora's pained, shallow breaths. He thought of Rourke, riding hard, fueled by rage and greed. They weren't safe yet. Just before dawn, a sound cut through the wind's moan, not natural, the distinct, rhythmic clop of shod horses on the stony trail below. Several horses, coming fast. Amos stiffened, his hand tightening on the rifle stock. He crept to the doorway, peering out into the gray pre-dawn light. Down the winding trail from the direction of the Box K, a group of riders emerged from shadows. 4, maybe 5, in the lead on a tall, powerful horse that pranced with nervous energy, was a man Amos instinctively knew, Silas Rourke. He sat ramrod straight, his face a mask of cold fury visible even at a distance. Beside him, Vance rode, one arm bandaged, his expression savage. They had found them. Rourke reined in his mount at the edge of the ghost town, his gaze sweeping the crumbling buildings like a hawk searching for prey. His voice, cold and carrying, sliced through the morning stillness. Cora, bring me my property. Bring me what you stole. Do it now, and I'll make the end quick for the rancher. He paused, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that somehow carried even further. Defy me, and you'll watch those mongrel whelps die slow. Inside the dark assayer's office, Eli stirred, letting out a thin, frightened whimper. Cora gasped, clutching the twins closer. Amos met her terrified gaze across the dim space. The hunter was here. The reckoning had come. There would be no ride to Bitter Springs. No judge. Just stone walls, a rifle, a bow, and a desperate would protect two fragile lights against the coming darkness. Amos eased the Winchester's hammerback with soft, decisive click. The sound echoed in the tense silence. Outside, Silas Rourke waited.